Al Capone, also known as Scarface, was a very dangerous and infamous Chicago mobster, bootlegger, and murderer.
He had no regret for killing people, as he reportedly killed 4 people himself and ordered the murder of many others, letting his henchmen do the dirty work. Al Capone was born Alphonse Gabriel Capone to an immigrant Italian family in 1899 and died in 1947.
When he was young, Al lived in the rough Navy Yard area of Brooklyn, which was where many rough and shady sailors lived.
Being in such a rough neighborhood definitely contributed to him being a gangster. People were surprised when he became a gangster because his father and his mother were completely respectable people, although they were not very rich.
His father, Gabriel, was a very respected barber.
His mother, Teresina, was a seamstress who gave birth to 9 children, 3 of them becoming criminals, including Capone.
Both his parents were born in Angri, a town in Italy.
Frank and Ralph Capone were 2 of his brothers that worked with him in his crime business. When Al was young, he started a child gang to get something back that was stolen from an old lady by a crowd of bullies.
When his gang found the bullies, they beat them up. They then returned as heroes and held a parade to honor themselves.
When Al was 11, his family moved to Park Slope in Brooklyn.
His career really started when he was 11, started skipping school, and joined 2 gangs, the 40 Thieves Juniors and the Brooklyn Rippers.
Al was always a promising student, but he had a hard time at the very strict Catholic school. At the age of 14, Capone was expelled for hitting a female teacher in the face.
Shortly after dropping out of school, he met the gangster Johnny Torrio, who was the biggest influence for Al Capone. Johnny Torrio was one of the first gangsters who changed crime from a brutal, messy thing to a financial empire, something Capone was famous for.
He taught Capone that it was important to keep a respectable image in the citizens' eyes so that you could get away with more. Torrio taught Capone all he knew about bootlegging, the selling of whiskey, which was illegal back then.
Capone then joined Torrio's gang, James Street Boys, and over time he rose through the ranks and joined the infamous and lethal 5 Points gang. It was while in the 5 Points gang that Capone was employed by a shady bartender, Frankie Yale, who worked at Coney Island.
It is while working for Yale, Capone made a rude remark about a woman, and her brother jumped out, slashing Capone, leaving 3 large scars on the left side of his face.
Rude remark.
This was how Capone got the nickname he hated, Scarface.
The nickname that his closest friends called him was Snarky, which means well-dressed.
Capone married Mae Josephine Coughlin when he was 19 on December 30th, 1918. Earlier that month, Mae had given birth to their son, Albert Francis Capone.
When Capone was 20, he moved to Chicago at the invitation of Johnny Torrio, who had been imported to Chicago by his boss, Big Jim Colosimo. May 11th, 1920, Colosimo was murdered and Johnny Torrio took over as boss. It was believed that the murder was committed by Capone or Frankie Yale.
Torrio was now in charge of a mainly Italian gang, and Capone was second in command. Capone did not like being drawn into gang wars and always tried to negotiate. Torrio and Capone's gang had a dispute with a smaller gang called the North Side Gang, which was led by Dino Banyan.
Torrio made the fateful choice of ordering the murder of old Banyan at his flower shop in October 1924. After O'Banion's murder, the Northside Gang was taken over by Hamie Weiss, backed up by Vincent Drucci and Bugs Moran.
Weiss had been a very good friend of O'Banion's, and he swore revenge on his killers. In January 1925, Capone was ambushed, but he was okay. 12 days later, Johnny Torrio was returning from a shopping trip and was shot multiple times.
Torrio recovered but had to resign as leader. This meant he handed his criminal business that transported illegal liquor to Capone. Capone was 26 at the time. This meant that his name started appearing in the newspapers a bit, and he had a lot more power to do as he wished. Any place that refused to buy liquor from Capone often got blown up, and at least 100 people were killed in these bombings.
Although he ordered the murder of so many people, he always enjoyed being a hero in the citizens' eyes. For example, he opened a soup kitchen during the Depression, and he created a program where all school children got free milk. Because of things like these, Al Capone would get a standing ovation whenever he went to baseball games, and was loved by the public, unlike many other gangsters at the time.
After a couple more attacks from the Northside Gang, Capone tried to call a truce, but they didn't accept Capone's negotiations. A couple weeks later, Weiss was killed outside of O'Banion's flower shop.
But possibly his greatest and most famous scheme of all was the Valentine's Day Massacre. The rivalry between Capone's gang and the Northside gang grew. Capone wanted to get rid of some of their strongest members, so he had a bartender lead them into the garage at the promise of whiskey.
However, Capone sent in some of his men disguised as policemen and conducted a fake police raid. They lined the 7 members of the gang who were in the garage up against a wall, and the gang members, thinking they would go to jail for purchasing illegal whiskey, got a nasty surprise when 2 more men from Capone's gang came into the garage and shot the 7 members dead. But he failed to kill the leader of the gang, Bugs Moran, because Bugs Moran was running late and saw the fake police car and ran away. As Capone's criminal empire grew, he became more infamous and more people started to fear him. The government at the time was relentlessly trying to arrest Capone for something, but he was very sneaky and they could not pin him for anything.
On October 17th, 1931, the police finally arrested Al Capone for tax evasion. After getting imported from multiple prisons, he got sent to Alcatraz, the prison where all the most dangerous criminals go.
His health was very evidently decreasing, and he suffered from syphilis, a disease related to cocaine addiction. He spent his last year in Alcatraz in the prison hospital confused and disoriented.
After his prison sentence was finished, he went back to his mansion in Florida to live with his family. On January 21st, 1947, he had a stroke, but started recovering. However, he suffered a cardiac arrest on January 22nd and died on January 25th, 1947. Al Capone was buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois.
Al Capone had a very big impact on the crime in Chicago, changing it from a crude but messy thing to a sophisticated but still dangerous business.